Audiobook Academy Biography presents Charles Dickens. This is the life story of Charles Dickens, the famous English author who is credited with being the father of the social novel. Satire and levity abound in his work, but so do romanticism and sentimentality. Author and narrator Charles Dickens was a native of England. In addition to being the second of 8 children, he dropped out of school at the age of 12 after his father landed up in London's Marshal's Debt Prison due to debt. The father of the modern social novel was a painter of the English aristocracy and its lower and middle classes. It is evident in his art that there are elements of the romantic and sentimental in it. Childhood and education. As the second child of John and Elizabeth Dickens and the third of their 8 children, Charles Dickens was born in Landport, Portsea, on February 7, 1812. His father was a clerk by trade. On Norfolk Street, Bloomsbury, where Charles was born, the family relocated to Chatham, Kent, when he was 4 years old. He stayed there until the age of 11. Tobias Smollett and Henry Fielding, 2 of his favorite authors, were among the many books he read when he wasn't playing outside. Due to his father's employment at the Navy Pay Office during this brief period, Charles received an education from private schools. Due to the family's financial difficulties in 1822, they had to move from Kent to Camden Town in London and halt his private education. John Dickens, a man prone to living beyond his means, was jailed in London's Southwark in 1824 for debt. As was customary at the period, he was soon imprisoned along with his wife and youngest children. Charles was placed in Camden Town with his family's acquaintance Elizabeth Roylance when he was 12 years old. He later lived in the attic of Archibald Russell's house, where he was an insolvency agent. His personalities were later inspired by both of these people. It was during this time that Frances was released from her duties at the Royal Academy of Music that he spent every Sunday with his sister. He had to drop out of school and work 10 hours a day in a sticker's factory in order to pay for his lodging and support his family. As a result of the difficult and frequently harsh working conditions he encountered, Dickens developed an interest in social and economic change and working conditions. Elizabeth Dickens, John Dickens' paternal grandmother, died after several months in Marshalsea prison and left him a £450 fortune. When John took control, he was sentenced to prison. The Dickens family was released from prison after paying all their debts. After starting Wellington House Academy in North London, Charles' mother didn't immediately take him out of the factory and send him to Wellington House Academy. While the woman still had a role to play in the household in Dickens' view, the father was the one who should be in charge. Women's attitudes about him were shaped by the fact that he refused to return to the industry. In his works, he focused on the plight of the working class and the oppressive conditions they faced. From May 1827 to November 1828, he worked as a junior clerk in the law office of Ellis and Blackmore. After that, he became a journalist. Thomas Charlton's second cousin forced him to work as a court reporter in England. Dickens sat next to him in the Doctors' Commons, Civil Court, and wrote 4 years of court reports. In his writings, he recounted these encounters, novels Nicholas Nickleby, Dombey and Son, and especially Bleak House. A wider audience was exposed to his ideas on how the judicial system works, as well as the great burden it places on the poor when they are obliged to go to court. Dickens met his first love, Maria Beadnell, in 1830, and she is widely regarded as the inspiration for the character of Dora in the novel David Copperfield. Because her parents disapproved of their daughter's connection, they sent her to school in Paris, putting an end to their romance. The Evening Chronicle's editor George Hogarth's daughter Catherine Thompson Hogarth married him on April 2, 1836. They returned to Furnival's Inn after a honeymoon in Chalk, Kent. The first of his 10 children, Charlie, was born in January 1837, and the family moved to Bloomsbury a few months later. Charles held a 3-year lease from March 25, 1837, to December 1839, at 48 Doughty Street in London. Catherine and Frederick Dickens, Dickens' younger brother, moved in with them, as did Mary Dickens, Catherine's younger sister. Mary Dickens died in his arms in 1837 after a brief illness, and Dickens was devastated. Several of Dickens' later characters, including Rose Maylie, Little Nell, and Florence Dombey, are thought to have been based on Mary. His anguish was so deep that he had to cancel Oliver Twist sequels for the month of June because he was behind in writing the Pickwick Papers extracts. Career as an author. When Dickens was 20 years old in 1832, he was a vivacious, good-natured young man who loved to party and had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. However, he did know that he wanted to be famous. Although he had a strong interest in theater, he was unable to attend an audition in Covent Garden because of a cold, effectively ending his hopes of a future on stage. His debut article A Dinner at Poplar Walk was published in London's Monthly Magazine a year later. For the Morning Chronicle, He stayed in a rented room at the Furnival's Inn, became a political journalist, and reported on parliamentary debates while traveling around the United Kingdom. In 1836, he compiled Sketches by Boz, a compendium of his magazine articles. Boz was his family nickname which he used as a pseudonym. Charles Dickens is said to have taken the name Moses from the nickname he gave to Augustus Dickens, his youngest brother. To say Moses, someone with a cold might say, Bosses, which was eventually shorthand for Buzz. Also, Dickens was used when he changed Hell to Dickens. In the poem What the Dickens? William Shakespeare used it for the first time in The Merry Wives of Windsor, a comedy. Also known as playing havoc/mischief, it is used in the expression to play the Dickens, which is another way of saying being naughty/insidious. For the remainder of his life, he worked as a magazine writer and editor. Once his sketches were popular, Chapman and Hall gave Dickens the opportunity to write a book with illustrations. Dickens engaged Tableau Knight Brown, Phiz, to illustrate the second edition after Seymour committed suicide. The Pickwick Papers was the product of this partnership, which was published in multiple segments. 40,000 copies of the previous sequel were sold. Dickens obtained a position as editor at Bentley's Miscellany in November 1836 and worked there for 3 years before getting into a fight with the publisher. His work on Oliver Twist began with the release of Pickwick's last sequel in 1836. One of Dickens' better-known novels, Oliver Twist, was released in 1838 and quickly became a hit on stage and screen. It was also the first novel in Victorian literature to feature a kid protagonist. Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and Barnaby Rudge, A Tale of the Riots of '80 were all published as sequels, and were later published as books. His success continued with these works. He relocated to Tavistock House in November of 1851, where he wrote Bleak House, 1852-53, Hard Times, 1854, and Little Dorrit, 1860. 1857. He occupied himself with amateur theatre at his new place of residence, where he had moved. Writing brought in enough money to buy Gad's Hill Place, which he had frequently passed as a boy in Higham, Kent, and dreamed of one day living there. Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1, which Dickens loved, had some of its action take place in that same spot. Dickens' protégé Wilkie Collins wrote a play called The Frozen Deep for which he employed professional actresses in 1857. One of them struck a chord with Dickens. Ellen Ternan was Ellen Ternan's lifelong love. At 45 years old, Dickens decided to separate from his wife, Ternan, in 1858, which was highly unsuitable under Victorian traditions at the time, while divorce was impossible. Although her husband never saw her again, Catherine took one of their children and left the others in the care of Sister Georgina, who had made the decision to stay at the Gad's Hill Convent. At the time, Dickens was asked to help raise money for a hospital, Great Ormond Street Hospital, even though he was contemplating public readings. The hospital's board of directors member, Charles West, requested Dickens for his assistance, and Dickens accepted, raising enough money through public readings to assure the hospital's long-term financial stability. On February 9, 1858, he collected a total of £3,000. While on tour across England, Scotland, and Ireland, Dickens began a series of readings of his works that took much of his time for the next decade, and he wrote only 2 books during this period. Both A Tale of Two Cities, 1859, and Great Expectations, 1861, were huge hits. His publications included Household Words, 1850-1859, and All the Year Round, both 1859. 1858-1870. Dickens authorized a massive bonfire in a field near his Gad's Hill estate in September 1860, and he destroyed most of the letters there. Only those of a business character survived. It's unclear how long Ellen Ternan kept Dickens' letters after she burnt them all. A pre-death chat between Kate Perugini, Dickens' daughter, and Thomas Wright in the 1930s revealed that Ternan and Canon Benham had a son who died as a newborn. There isn't any proof. Dickens left an income for Ternan upon his death, making her financially secure. For at least 13 years, according to Claire Tomalin's book The Invisible Woman, Ternan lived under the radar with Charles Dickens. Simon Gray's play Little Nell was adapted from the novel. Dickens joined the Engel Group at this time because he was becoming more interested in the paranormal. The Club of the Ghosts. Dickens and Ternan were returning from Paris on June 9, 1865, when their train was involved in an automobile accident. An iron bridge that was being repaired caused the first 7 wagons to fall into a nearby river. Only Dickens' first-class carriage remained on the rails. Dickens was providing water and brandy to the victims before rescuers arrived. His car had the manuscript for Our Mutual Friend, an incomplete composition, and before he left, he returned it. In his short fiction The Signalman, in which the main character predicts his own demise in a train disaster. He made use of this event. On the basis of various previous train accidents, this story is also founded. With Turner and her mother on board, Dickens evaded the accident investigation because he feared it would generate a sensation. Despite the fact that he was unharmed, Dickens was haunted by the experience of witnessing the train wreck. Our Mutual Friend and The Mystery of Edwin Drood were the only projects he ever worked on. When Charles Dickens decided to end his lifelong career in 1869, he organized a farewell readings tour of the United Kingdom and Ireland. He completed 75 of the 100 readings he had agreed to. On the recommendation of a doctor, he cancelled the tour on April 22, 1869, due to an attack of dizziness and paralysis. As soon as he had recovered sufficiently, he organized the final readings to make up for the sponsors' losses as a result of the tour's cancellation. St. James's Hall in London hosted the final reading of the tour. A banquet at the Royal Academy, where the Prince and Princess of Wales were in attendance, was his final public appearance, where he paid respect to his late friend and illustrator Daniel Maclise. Death. After a long day of work on Edwin Drood, Charles Dickens suffered a second stroke at his house on June 8, 1870. 5 years after the train disaster, he didn't regain consciousness and died the following day, June 9. Instead of being buried in Rochester Cathedral in accordance with his intentions, he was entombed in Westminster Abbey. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.